episode of The Shift is sponsored by the Ultimate Faith Store. This store carries faith-based apparel and accessories for men, women, and children. To purchase an item from the Ultimate Faith Store, please use the link attached to this episode and use the code Camille for 10% off. Now, back to the episode, Jay. Welcome to The Shift, a podcast here to help you adjust to the new. I'm your host, Camille. If this is your first time watching, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, follow my Facebook page, and keep up with The Shift on Instagram. This podcast is here to help you get through anything, everything, all things new. Whether it means moving to a new city, starting a new career, getting through a new relationship, or even getting through new tough times such as anxiety and depression. So get ready, get set, and let's shift. See you guys soon. Well, hello everyone. We are back for another episode of The Shift. I'm your host, Camille. And as always, this season we are talking about shifting out of shock. So as you all know, we've experienced a global pandemic where everyone has gone through shock in major ways. So for some people, it could have been losing a loved one, could have been losing their job. It could have been dealing with mental illness or anxiety, depression, whatever it is, everyone is experiencing something. And the goal of this podcast is to help them push through that and to be able to move forward. So for this episode, I am bringing on another author. Last week we had an author. This week we have another one. But this one, his strategy is unusual, a different strategy that I've never heard in my entire life. He actually is going to talk to us today about practicing death to remove our fears and to push forward in what we want to do in life. So on this episode, I'm going to bring on special guest and author, Gerry Murphy. Gerry, thank you for joining the Shift podcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Jay. First of all, pleasure to be here. I'm delighted to be on the show. First of all, I'm Scottish, so that's the accent explained. Scottish with an Irish name, which confuses the heck out of everybody, but it's actually Scottish. I'm 55 years old. I live in Manhattan, New York. Married. I've got a daughter who's 8 years old. I have two older children from my first marriage who still live in Scotland, and that's probably been the biggest part of the pandemic for us, and not being able to see them for well over a year now. And you know, that's the bit that's been the toughest for us. I've been a marketing professional for over 30 years on both sides of the Atlantic. Been a CEO, you know, so kind of built a career. And that's part of the story, actually, in terms of how, you know, I placed sort of imbalanced sort of virtue on my career versus my life, and really trying to work that out. And, you know, and it kind of culminated in a severe illness 6 years ago, nearly 6 years ago now, where I nearly lost my life. And that's, you know, afforded me the opportunity to rethink, restate, and kind of re-engage with my life in a completely different way. And I guess that's my shift to kind of keep in theme with the show.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Gerry, for joining us on the air. Yes, I'm excited to hear about your shift. I know we've had like our own one-on-one interview, and let me tell you, Gerry is powerful, you all. Like, we could go on and on talking because his interview was so life-changing, so moving. So I'm excited, and I definitely know that you're going to make an impact on the listeners tuning in today. So my question for you, Gerry, you talked about it just a pinch in your intro, but I know you like withheld from talking about it. But you wrote a book called "And May You Find Yourself: A Guided Practice to Never Fearing Death Again." Can you give us a little history on what made you write this book and what happened in your life?
Sure. So it refers back to the kind of chapter in my life when I was sick. You know, it was out of the blue. I was taken ill, rushed to hospital, admitted to ICU. Nobody knew what was wrong with me. And for 6 days, I was in this sort of purgatorial on earth state where, you know, I didn't know what was happening, and they didn't know, you know, the best doctors in the world in New York City didn't know what was going on either. And so, you know, it was a real period of doubt and fear and, you know, and concern for everybody, you know, my family, my close ones, all of that, you know. And so But for me, it was a sort of evolutionary period. Now that I know I came through it, but there was days there where there was serious doubt whether I was going to make it, and doctors would come in and say, "Wow, you're doing remarkably well considering," and it would be like ... and you're like, considering what? I mean, because you can only tell from yourself, right, from your own circumstance or from your own feeling, like where you're at. I knew I was in trouble, but I didn't realize I was in that much trouble until I got some of that diagnosis. So anyway, the reason that as I came through that, and I was fortunate enough and blessed enough to come through, and I've had a myriad of treatments and operations since to recover, but actually when you contextualize it with in an ICU room, not sure if you're going to make it, it's an easier struggle to go through, because you just take yourself back to that moment and think, well, I promised myself when I was in that moment that I would never complain about these moments, so now get on with it, right? So and I felt that was a sort of mantra that could be used by others. I never really set out to be an author. I never desired to be an author, which is kind of strange. It was kind of strange to end up being one when because my career was so planned and so sort of precise in terms of how I went through the steps in my career, and yet here I am, an author, written one book, published it, in the process of writing a second one, and I never imagined that for myself. But the purpose of writing the book was, well, there was one selfishly and one unselfishly. Selfishly, my two older children were still in Scotland when I was sick. So it was only by the graces of social media were they really being kept up to speed with what was going on, because my situation was changing so fast. It was impossible for my wife to keep in contact with everybody by phone. So she would post an update to tell people where I was at and what was going on, and diagnoses or next steps and all of that sort of stuff. So I felt that, and Frances was only 1 at the time. My daughter is 8 now. She was only 1 turning 2 at the time. I felt like they didn't really know what happened. They knew, but they didn't really know, and they certainly didn't know how I felt about it.
Right.
And so selfishly, I wanted to write the book to tell them the journey that I've been on during that and since, and so that they have that now and then later when I'm not here. So that was the kind of selfish reason for telling a story. The unselfish reason was this thought about practicing death, which is the sort of subtitle of the book. I thought if I could help one person, come to terms with what they're going through, or not make the same mistakes that I feel that I made in my life, like chasing a career and holding that up, is a false god to some extent, in terms of how I viewed myself. If I could do that, then maybe somebody else would benefit from my circumstance, and that was really the purpose for writing the book.
Absolutely. And one, I don't think it's selfish at all, especially like for your kids, because you're helping them as well through what you're writing. So it's going to encourage them to take every moment of life. And then two, so, as I was looking at your book and the background, and I was looking at different reviews and comments to come up with questions, I noticed that some of the people who made reviews were saying this was so necessary to have experiencing the pandemic. And so that's what baffles me is it's like you wrote the book before there was a pandemic just based on your story and what you experienced. And then to know that it encouraged several people because the entire world had to be put on hold and everyone was going through this in some way, shape, form, or fashion. So I personally think that's amazing that you wrote it when you did, and then that it was able to move and encourage so many people who were experiencing this global pandemic. That's awesome.
It was what they say, the world moves towards you, right? And so when you reach out, the world moves towards you. And I think, I considered, because I'd almost finished the final manuscript when COVID hit in March. And I considered adding on a piece to put it in. And I felt like, actually, I don't know where this ends. I know where my story is, and I know I can be up to date on that. I couldn't really be current with COVID. And actually, there wasn't that much to say, because really, the pandemic for me, from my own personal point of view, hasn't been that sort of life altering, because I already had my day with the same adversary 5 years ago, right? So I've already been to this story, I've seen it, and so, and not to be flippant about it, but I already knew how to respond to it. I already had kind of reframed my own personal response, and like, if things get taken away, my whole life was about to be taken away, and so there's no beyond that, and so when you think about that, everything else kind of becomes smaller in context. And it really helped me. And so it was very simple. And although I'm like immunocompromised and things like that, in terms of all of the statements that they made, it was very easy for me. I just shut down for 3 or 4 months. We laugh because friends of ours in our own building in Manhattan, they were texting Jen, my wife, look, can we see a picture of Gerry for proof of life? Because we haven't seen it. But it was really easy for me just to kind of go, that's my response to what's happening right now.
Yeah.
Because in the ICU, I was at the mercy of many other things, and I wasn't in control. I still felt like, I mean, like, I was lucky that, you're lucky you come through COVID and, you get through all of that. But I felt there was decisions I could make that would give me more control than less, and that compromised my work, it compromised my relationships, all of that. But the ultimate goal was, well, if I can get through this, there'll be more of all of that beyond this, on my terms, not on anybody else's terms. And that's really how I kind of viewed it. So practicing death echoed right through pandemic for me, in terms of like, I know what, it's kind of like, I was listening to something today, and they said, they were talking about winning and how it kind of creates different emotions and different outcomes in people. And one of the commentators said, what if you reframe winning in your life? And winning was just to stay focused and stay on your plan. What if that was the winning defined? And I was in preparing to come to talk to you and excited to talk to your listeners. I thought that's kind of interesting, because that reframes, like, winning is just doing what you thought you said you were going to do, regardless of the circumstance. And you pivot a little bit, but still, you're still on my plan. I'm still focused on what I want to be and what I want to do and who I want to be to others. So, and if that's the definition of winning, then certainly that's my sort of new sort of, I'm kind of wrestling with that in my head in terms of a new definition of winning for me.
Yeah, no, that's crazy that you heard that today and talked about it, because actually, I went to church today, and that's a concept that my pastor was talking on, was setting out to win our race. And essentially the race is life. And so winning the race, like you said, is doing what you set out to do, accomplishing that. And how do we accomplish that? We keep our eyes on the task ahead. We don't, allow the weights of what's, bearing us down to keep us from finishing, to keep us from pushing forward. So I have to bring you to this point, because I'm kind of curious. I know what you mean, but others may not know what you mean. Can you define practicing death? Is it almost like the idea of, well, if tomorrow was your last day or today was your last day, what would you do? Or how would you define that in your terms?
It's essentially that, right? So if you can take my circumstance or anybody else circumstance and put that into your life and say, beyond today, I may not have any more choices. I may not have anything else. So, if I can use that as the energy and the impetus behind my life, because all you're left with is to review how you were, what you did, where you're at in your life, if you think it's going to end. At one point, and the worst day was the Saturday of the 3 days into the 6 days. And I turned to my wife, and I remember, and I'm a competitor, and I'm fierce, and I've never really backed off any challenges in my life. But I remember turning to her at one point and saying, I don't know if I can do this, take too much more of this, and when I wrote the book, I cried writing it, because I couldn't believe, because it's really hard to put yourself back there and reimagine how you felt, to kind of concede that you might be losing, and obviously a lot of people had that through COVID as well, in terms of like their battle and, and things like that. But the practicing death element is to say, on that day, later that day, I was just left to reflect. And I was like, well, if this, and you're faced with this kind of question, if this is it, what is it, right? What did I do? What would I change?
Mm,
What did I miss? What value did I add? How will people talk about me? So you're left with all of these sort of reflections. So when I came to write the book, my reflection was, you actually don't need to be in an ICU hospital bed to do that.
yeah.
You have to clear your head, and you have to clear your space, and you have to give yourself some breathing room to kind of do that honestly. But if you
Right.
took that down and said, today's the last day, today is it, what would I change tomorrow about where I'm at?
Mm,
And there's, like it's, and like we talked about this before, Jay. This is not Hollywood, so there's no instant transformation.
right.
You carry the scars and the bruises of all of how you've been, and a lot of it's programmed behavior. But actually, so when you think about that, so we just talked about winning. How is winning defined in a professional world? Not like that. Not like that at all, right?
Yeah.
So you have to kind of reframe some of the paradigms that have shaped your life, and you have to be honest enough to be able to dig into that. But I started really simply. I wrote a list of the people that I'd lost touch with along the way, that I promised myself on that day I would get back in touch with if I got through this.
That's good. No.
Real
Wow.
simple, real simple stuff. It doesn't have to be earth-shattering, just real simple stuff. And some people deserved an apology, and some people was just like picking up where we'd left off, and you wonder why you'd left off, right? And so, but the feel-good factor was definitely reconnecting with people. And the truth
Yeah.
is, lying in a hospital bed with success in my career, everything I've achieved, and all of that sort of stuff, the only thing that really matters is the people you love and the people you came across in your life.
That's
It
so
really
true.
matters.
No, that's so true. And honestly, it's wild that we're having this discussion, because I've had other near death experience stories that I've heard from different people that I've just come across with. And every time they go through that, or they went through that experience, it always comes back to people. And, did I miss a connection with someone? Maybe I need to go apologize to someone, or ask them for forgiveness, or whatever it is, like reconcile. Whereas most people, when they think of life and the way that Hollywood tries to portray it, it's like you're supposed to get all of this money, create up this whole, lifestyle of wealth and mega mansion and everything. That's what life is supposed to be. And when you walk away, it's supposed to be with all of your treasures and your glory galore. But in reality, most of the time, people who have gone through these experiences, it's not about that at all. I loved the comment that you made, that you look back and you're like, what value did I make? What impact did I make? What did I leave behind? And truthfully, even if you have money and wealth, because those are good things to have,
Yep.
it will leave something to help sustain your family. But if you're not there with them while you're accruing all of this money and wealth, are they going to remember you? Or are they just going to remember the money and the wealth that you left behind?
And I think that's the essence of it, right? And I think, the impact you have in people's lives, who you helped, who you supported, who you loved, who loved you, those things that's the currency you're left with in that situation. It's the only currency that matters. I didn't think about work. I didn't think about money. I didn't think about anything when I was in that hospital bed, other than the people who were around me, or the people I was missing, or the people that I didn't bring with me on, as far as I could have in this journey. And and that's a very sobering thought. And it's not, look, and I don't want the listeners to take this the wrong way. This is not about give up all of your stuff and follow me. It's not scripture, right? It's not.
Yeah.
It's not that. It's not that. It's about do what you want to do. I love what I do as a job. I love it. I've done for 30 plus years. I still have a curiosity about customer shopping in a marketing world that I had from day one. So I'm not saying back off that, or what is it? Just find a balance that allows you to do the things that give you a better balance. So if you ever find yourself, and let's face it, we're all going to end up back in that day, right? We know it comes to everybody at some point. So when you come back to that day, you can rest easy, because you know that you have good answers to all of the questions that are posed. You'll still have regrets. And like I couldn't get my head around Frances being only 1, nearly 2, and she just, and this recurring phrase in my head, she just got here. I can't believe it. And that was
Hmm.
sort of my energy. I was like, I've got to be here for her,
Yeah.
and that doesn't. And look, there's been plenty of other people who unfortunately have passed with the same energy and the same defiance to try and survive. I'm sure, and so I was lucky. But if I forget that how lucky I was, then I'm doing a disservice to the experience that I had. And if I don't, and I feel like now, if I don't share that, then there's other people out there that could benefit from knowing that.
No, that's absolutely, I agree. So, listening to you, Gerry, it sounds like what helped you to shift during that time period in your life was the people. Because when I listen, you said you were in isolation for days. So
Yeah.
no one else was in there, no one was with you. You were nearly eating. So what helped you to shift out of this and to say, I got to get out of here. I got to push through. I got to live.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to my children actually and my wife. I think my wife's backstory is a challenge in itself. She lost her first husband to cancer when he was 36. So and we joke about it now because she thought she was going to be the Black Widow because thought she killed another husband and stuff. I mean,
Oh,
we're just being flippant about it because it's hard to deal with, right?
yeah.
And so and that's kind of how we both deal with elements of life like that. But really, my children really, and really the desire to be better, and there'll be another judge of whether I've been better since or I've improved. I feel like I feel better in myself. So if that's any guide, then that's a good measure. But really, really the desire to get back to the people that mattered and to tell them they mattered, and hopefully that makes a difference to them. And and then ultimately, as I came through it, to tell my story, to say, this is, this can benefit you too.
Yeah, no, that's good. So when we think about practicing death,
Yeah.
how do you think that can help people experiencing this pandemic? Like you said, she had lost her first husband to cancer, people going through cancer, or honestly, people just in general. It could be mental illness, whatever it is that they're going through. How do you think that practicing death can help them during this time period?
Well, I think so I think and obviously it's been a long year and plus in terms of the pandemic, and probably emphasis has changed around what was taken away to begin with, and and as the country opens up, seeing less restrictions. There's still confusion around, really, in terms of when you look at no masks, yes masks. I mean, who knows, right?
Right.
But I'm really clear. I'll just make my own choices. That's fine. I don't care.
Yeah.
Ridicule me for wearing a mask if you want. That's fine. I don't care. So.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think the point really is, from the pandemic perspective, is if you go through the exercise of practicing death and you make your list and you kind of decide on the things that you think are integral to your life going forward.
Mm-hmm.
If the pandemic is not touching them, why do you, to some extent, why are why would you sweat it? Right? Because the things that you care for, the things that you cherish, the things that give you, the oxygen you need are still there. So focus on those things, not the things that have been taken away. Society's so about, I've got this, or this has been taken away, and and all of that sort of stuff. It's so possessive, and that's really, and that's I think that's part of the challenge that it's arrived in this era, when we've got such a possessive society about what we're entitled to, what we should have, what we shouldn't have, and all of that sort of interaction. And what I feel is like I've focused in on the things that give me joy. I've been fortunate enough. I'm still working, so I still have a couple of clients that came through the pandemic with me. So I've got enough to keep going, and so I focused on that. I focused on the things that give me joy. It played right into my hands. I spend more time with my family than I ever did. That was one of the things that I call out in the book. That's one of the things that I said, like the joy of being able to take my daughter to school every single day. 7 years ago, before my illness, I'd have been too busy. I'd have had to leave early for work. I wouldn't have had I wouldn't have taken the time to do that.
Yeah.
I just wouldn't have. I would have prioritized it differently. But to walk over to pick up the car with her hand in my hand, to drive to school and have 20 minutes with her in the car, just talking about whatever's in her 8-year-old mind, It doesn't, it's gold. It's just gold.
Yeah, that's amazing. No, it sounds like practicing death helped you to cherish the little things even more. And especially, you keep mentioning like time with your family, with your loved ones, like really embracing them. So, along the lines of the subject of today's podcast, though, how do you think practicing death will help people to not operate in fear? Because most people fear death.
Yeah.
And most people are fearful in general. Everyone is afraid of something, I believe. So how does practicing death help us to not fear?
So first of all, I agree with you. I think fear is omnipresent. I think it's just a question of how much fear is in your life, right? So if you've got it kind of dumbed down, then you can live with it, and you can use it as fuel, if in the right ways. But so I think it's omnipresent, because I think we're all scared of something, and even if, and as you go through your life, I'm in my 50s, so your mortality becomes very clear to you when your body can't do what it used to do, and all of these sort of things. You kind of go, well, we're over the, even if it's just 150s a half, I'm over the hill now, right? Literally from a numerics point of view. So, so there's that part of it. But I think really the focus has got to be about, how do you diminish the fear. So if you go through that, if you go through practicing death, and when you isolate the things that matter to you, and then you can kind of attribute it doesn't have to be a number. It just has to be a feeling about how much that matters to you.
Right.
And your fear is probably, in my case anyway, my fear was related more to the fact that I wasn't doing anything about it. Not that I was scared of the outcome. I was scared because I knew I wasn't dealing with it properly. In some ways, and I knew, and that was a kind of an awakening over the years. As I came through my, the kind of senior part of my career and things like that, I just was aware that this isn't giving me the fulfillment. I would get, I got a job as a CEO, and you get there, and it's the loneliest place in the world, and you're like, I don't really want this. I spent 30 years chasing this, and here I am, and I don't really want it to be like this, and so I channeled that fear of being in a place that I didn't want to be, to say, right, I'm going to restate my professional, output and sort of interaction with the market in a way that is framed in my life and in my control. As long as I can make a living doing it, then that's the way I decided I wanted to do it. So I stepped off the sort of corporate ladder, and after my last job, and said, no, I'm going to take time to think about how we do this. And that's why I consult now, because I don't want to be, I'm still as passionate about what I do. I think I still as much value as I was, but right. The balance is mine, not theirs.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I love that essentially through facing your fears, you were able to really look at what it was that you wanted to do in life. And honestly, you're right. Everyone does have fear. Fears is something that's always going to be present in this life, but it's how we magnify or diminish it that matters. And with practicing death, as you mentioned, it's like you said to yourself, okay, so if tomorrow is my last day, essentially I'm going to do the things I want to do, the things that I've set out to do. Yeah. So more than likely that means diminishing your fears so that I can accomplish the task at hand, whatever it is, and win at my goals. And so it's like, why not do that now? Why not do that every single day that you have left? I love that. I love that you go into that.
And I think the pandemic piece is interesting, because I remember, after maybe a couple of months, there was all this talk about the new normal and getting back to normal and all of that. And I was actually quite sort of bothered by that, because I felt like, I don't think our normal was that great. I think, I think there was change required, and we've seen that from some social instances and things like that going through the year that we've been through, and, and some of the sort of social awakening and awareness that's going on. But I still feel pretty strongly that if at the end of COVID, all you do is go and pick up the bags that you dropped to your door in March of last year because of COVID, then you've missed an opportunity to really reappraise what matters to you. And you're just falling back into the same sort of cycle of where we were. And I think if Mother Nature is kind of played this on us, and I kind of personify it like that. Mother Nature's had a go at us because we weren't looking after the planet, we weren't looking after each other, we weren't looking after much, and we were kind of focused on a lot of the wrong things. So this was our reset button that she hit us with. And if that's the case, then practicing death allows you to kind of think through, well, what's my reset?
Yeah. No, that's good. Wow. I knew this podcast episode was going to be powerful because you even got me thinking for my own self, just listening to you. Wow, this is really good. So I do have another question, and this is more related to your book, but not what's in it, but what's on the outside. So your book looks like an album cover. Yep. And you have briefly talked about on the back of your book that you kind of use songs and music as a backdrop to your book. So would you say that music is something that helped you to cope during this time? Or, what made you do that? And then if it was something that helped cope, what would be some good coping mechanisms that we could pass to the audience today to help them get through their rough spots in life?
Yeah, so I think, simply put, music is my joy, right? Music is what delivers my personal joy. I mean, I say my family and all of that, but the thing that you derive joy from as an individual, and collective with other people when you're at a gig or whatever. But music has always been my joy and my passion from a very early age, like 2 or 3 years old. I can remember songs from back then for no apparent reason. And so I've always had this, sort of. I think it's a kind of synesthesia where in moments in my life, I hear songs, and they're not songs that are playing, they're songs that are in here, right? Songs that are from the past that I've heard. And so when I was fast forward to ICU, when I was in ICU, that's where the title of the book comes from. So, and You May Find Yourself is a 1979, 1980 song from Talking Heads. And you may find yourself living in a shotgun shack, etc., etc. And that was the thing that kept playing over in my head. And because I'm lying in a hospital bed, don't know if I'm going to survive. And I've got this lyric, and you may find yourself. So much so the editor tried to talk me out of calling it the book that. And I was like, no, that's the title. I don't care what you say. That is the title, because that's what matters to me. Because I found myself right there, right? And so music, and that's why, and I've always been a music wannabe, and it's taken me forever to understand my relationship with music, because I'm a decent singer. I'm not great. I don't think you would pay to hear me, but I can carry a tune for sure. But what you would pay to see is my passion for music when I sing, because I'm very passionate about it. But I tried, piano a dozen times. I tried guitar 3 or 4 times, because I really wanted to be a rock star, right? Really, ultimately, that's what I wanted to be. So, but it took me the longest time to realize, no, that's not my job with music. My job is to be the consumer. My job is to listen to what people create and buy what people create and respond to what people create, and in some cases share it, and kind of be connected to what they've talked about. And so that's why the book has got an album cover on the front, because it was essentially, I never got to make an album as an artist, so I wanted to make an album for myself, and that's why I put every song as a chapter within the book, because it was a song that either played in my head while I was writing that chapter, or it related to a moment in time, or when I was writing, actually, I post-rationalized that song in. So, so I really wanted that to be the theme of how the book came over, and because it focuses on the joy element of my life.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. And I'm with you. I'm a music lover as well. Maybe some people may want to hear me, some people may not. But to your point, it's something that brought you joy. And so something that we can leave, the listeners with is to do the things that bring you joy in this lifetime. Absolutely.
That's what my second book's actually about. It's about finding your joy, and relating my story through music to parts of my life, and how it's sort of helped me grow as an individual, and kind of taking the edges of my personality and my mentality and stretch them, because you can tap into other people's experiences, the writer, the songwriter, whoever, in terms of what they've created. Or you can disappear into 4 minutes of pure sort of, emotion in one song, and so it has this ability, which is, multivariant dimensions that it creates for you. So you can be happy while listening to a sad song, you can be sad while listening to a happy song. It's like, so for me, it really shapes my emotions. So my advice to the listeners is find what gives you that joy. It doesn't matter what it is. It really doesn't matter what it is, because it's yours. It's your personal joy. It will lead you to people who will share in your joy, and those are the connections that you will take on, right? Those are the connections that you maybe come to think about on when it is your last day. And for me, that's the central force of, to the point where I'm a huge David Bowie fan, right? Huge David
Bowie yes, fan. I love David Bowie.
And my daughter's 8, and so one day I got her to help me chronologically list out all of his albums on the floor, so she could see all of the albums that I've got of his and how they changed over the years and how she's connected to it. Because I fear for her that her take on music is TikTok, and it's like 30 seconds of dance routine and nothing else. And that's not how I grew up. And so I feel it's like my job now to share real music with her,
So to introduce her to the classics, the good stuff.
yeah, exactly.
No, that's awesome. That's beautiful. And I love that she gave us a hint on what your next book is about. So
that's an exclusive. I haven't said that anywhere yet,
I appreciate the insight. So can you when is that expected to drop?
Oh man, I'm stuck at the moment, so I'm kind of going through one of those block periods. I mean, hopefully later this year. I'm kind of hoping I can channel some energy into it over the summer. I know what it's supposed to say. I know how it's supposed to be framed up. I've done all of that work. I just haven't actually sat down and written for a period. I wrote the intro and the first chapter, and I like how it's shaping up. So I'm just kind of researching a few things that I want to check on and kind of building up the story. But it's really about finding your joy. Ironically, unlike the first book, it doesn't have a title. It doesn't have anything like that, so it's kind of interesting because it's kind of like, it's just like a piece at the moment, and so, but I feel, the writing the last time was so cathartic for me, and it kind of, it brought up so many emotions and so many memories and so many good things in terms of really connecting me to what the book stood for. So I feel like when I get into the guts of writing this one, that will be there too. But it's really about that. Find your joy, whatever your joy is, whether it's like, I don't know, knitting, fitness, music, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It's yours. It's yours. And that's what matters to that's what matters to you. And if that's what you end the day with or start the day with or whatever it is, then do that, because that will help you center and give you the clarity you need to be able to kind of make some of these other choices and decisions.
No, that's really good. And I love your lineup. And I don't know if you intentionally meant to do this or it just happened to follow along with your experiences in life, but it's almost like your first book is Find Yourself, and then your second book is Find Your Joy. And I think those two right there are just such powerful statements and things that people need to practice in general. One, find yourself, find just who you are. And then, and who you are in every single way. So figuring out what you enjoy, what you dislike, what you really, really cherish, what you love, what you hate. And then after you just found yourself and who you are, now find what brings you joy and really pour into that and push into that. Because as you push into those things that bring you joy, it's a give and take. And it's a never ending relationship that is always satisfying. That, at least that's how I look at it. Let's say, for example, for me, helping people brings me joy. That's why I do the podcast. That's why I do a lot of the things that I do. So if that's something that brings me joy, as I help them and bring them joy, they bring me joy. And it's a never ending relationship that I never feel like I'm empty or I'm drained, because I'm getting joy from it. and then I'm giving joy to them. And so I really just love your lineup, and I don't know if you intentionally meant for it to be that, but it sounds like it aligns perfectly.
To be perfectly honest, Jay, that's probably my reward for sharing you what the second book's about, because I hadn't even thought about it that way. So I'm going to take that. Thank you. I'm going to factor that into how I think about it.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. Okay, so we are going to get a quick word from our sponsor before I come back and ask you our last question of the podcast. And Gerry, really, I don't want it to be our last question because this has been such a great podcast, such a great discussion. But we are going to kick it over to our sponsor.
Cool.
Today's episode of The Shift is sponsored by the Ultimate Faith Store. This store carries faith-based apparel and accessories for men, women, and children. Their foundation scripture is Matthew 17:20, which reads, "Faith can move mountains." Up to 15% of all purchases are donated to charities, small communities, and people in need around the world. To purchase an item from the Ultimate Faith Store, please use the link attached to this episode and the code JCamille for 10% off. Now, back to you, Jay. So, Gerry, this brings us to our last question. And I have to ask every guest this question every single time that they come to the episode. But as we get ready to wrap up, what are 3 tips or pieces of advice that you would give a listener tuning in today?
So I think, not to beat the drum too much, but, practice death. Take that time, clear your space, clear your head, clear your calendar, and give yourself the time that it takes to really appraise where you are. And think about, if this was your last day, what would you change? And then straight after that, almost immediately come up with a short list of, these are the things I'd want to do, and break it down into, because it can be very daunting if you've got a lot to do. I had a lot to do, and it took me 5 years to get to anywhere near parts of that list. So frame it like that, right? It doesn't happen overnight, doesn't happen immediately. But get that list and start to check off quite simply the things that are in your control and you can do tomorrow, and start working through that and see, and you will feel so much better as you go through that, because you're starting to change. It'll catalyze within you, and it'll give you the energy and feed you to have the bravery and to diminish fear in the things that you're genuinely scared of, to be able to kind of go on and take them on. That's how you balance it out, is you know that you're doing the right thing, and you place more, love and fear. I look at them as kind of like, symbiosis, right? So if fear's way up, love has to be way down. So how do you augment the love and get it back so that your mixing desk is level way up here? And that's, so that would be the first tip. And the second tip, not to kind of steal the thunder of the second bit, would be find the joy. Not everybody knows what it is. As I've researched this book coming, that not everybody knows what their joy is. It's taken me a long time. Music being omnipresent in my life, but it took me a while to understand the value that it had in my life. The value that really created for me. So, find, explore, or search for, or develop the joy in your life and create time for that, because it'll fit into your other list. Right, and so they start to kind of build as like, let's start doing the changes we need to do. You focus on the things that matter the most. Then you're in a platform and in a building block to go on and do what you want to do. And I think, and I'm not sure there's a third one that kind of follows onto that really, but it's really that's you kind of deriving what you are and the sense of self that you need, so that when all of our days come, that you still have regrets. I'll still want to, when my day comes, I'll still want to have been there for days beyond with my children. But that's not how life works, right? And so there's some things you just have to accept that that's how it's going to be. And so, but then what can I do with the days that I've got with my kids? And so just the focus on that, and kind of keep re-energizing yourself towards those things. Because I made some mistakes after the illness, completely. Talk about it in the book. Made some big mistakes. Even with that experience, still made mistakes, because it's really hard to change that programmable behavior. And so that's what that's what I would say is, like, look, catch yourself doing the right things, and try and stop yourself doing the things that are falling back into where you were before.
Oh, that's really good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Gerry, for sharing that. I do have a question just based on your first tip. How long would you say is a reasonable amount of time to tell someone to practice death? Because you said give yourself a short moment to practice that and then write down those things that you would do. So what would you say is a healthy amount of time to give?
I think everyone's different, but I think I think if you're under an hour, then you're probably shortchanging it. In terms of like I don't think it's any more than that because it's not necessarily define everything in the first hour and that's your path.
Yeah.
It's define the start points, right, and then start what because an old boss of mine said many years ago, you know. Winning doesn't come in a straight line, right? So you end up finding roadblocks and things that work, and so some things are easier than others, and it's fine to focus on the easier things because they fuel your fire, like I said, and they give you the power and the energy to go and take on the harder things. So don't be scared of that, but you almost have to have a starting point, and that's really all it is. You're the driver after that in terms of how it develops and changes, and if the path changes, then that's probably because you wanted it to.
That's good. Wow. Well, thank you, Gerry, again for joining us on the air. I really appreciated you talking with us today, sharing with us about your book, your current book, and then the one that's upcoming.
Now I'm committed, right? Now I've got it right.
Right. We'll be on the lookout for sure. But before we leave, I do think we have a giveaway. So I think we do.
We do. So I'm delighted to offer, and you determine how, whether it's I don't know how you determine who the winners are, but you determine who the winners are. But two of your listeners can have a free copy of the book on Audible, and I will gift them that from my account. So if you don't hate the Scottish accent, because I narrate the story in Audible, so it's my story and my words. So it was an interesting experience actually, because it was even more powerful than writing it in some respects, because you have to say it out loud. But so yes, 2 Audible books for your listeners. Whoever wins, however you run your lottery or however you won your prize giving and giveaways, I'll leave that entirely to you. All I need is 2 email addresses, and I will get that Audible book out to them. Too sweet.
Yes, sweet. We love a giveaway. Well, you said 2 listeners. So I'm going to give 2 rules, 2 for 2. So the 2 rules are subscribing to the YouTube channel for J. Camille. And then after you subscribe, take a screenshot of it and repost it to your Facebook or Instagram story and tag the shift in it so that I can see. And that's it. 2 for 2. 2 listeners will be chosen. And those are the 2 rules that you have to do to be selected to win this Audible book that I know for certain is amazing. Just from listening to you and then from our interviews leading up to this. And the winner will be announced on Wednesday. So we will give everyone 3 days, and I'll look through. And by Wednesday at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, because Gerry is Eastern Standard Time, so we want to make sure we include all listeners for both of our audiences. That is when the winner will be announced. So again, I just want to thank you all for tuning in today. Thank you, Gerry, for your time and really for sharing this time with us.
Jay, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Camille, be sure to follow us on social media. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you all next week.